Hi, friends, and welcome back to the Smart Catholics show. I'm fortunate to be joined by Karen Deere and Father Matthew Bartow. We're chatting about the Holy Father. It's been about 3 weeks or so since we've last been on the channel, catching up on what Pope Leo has been up to, things that he's been involved in. That's kind of what we do. Is we're a couple of friends gathering together. Mostly, I'm just scrounging them for news because I don't follow the news. And if you're like me, you're seeing headlines go flying by because you're half in and out of social media. And so I appreciate where Father goes with things and how Karen sees things, and ask them catch me up on the latest with Pope Leo. So the four things we're going to chat briefly about today. We have a new document, Dilexi Te, from Pope Leo. It's a follow-up document or a follow-up act to Dilexi Te from recent Holy Father Pope Francis. Pope Leo has spoken clearly about a consistent life ethic with an issue that had North America all over the place, so we're going to chat briefly about that. There's also his recent comments in the Wednesday audience talking about the resurrection of Christ. Lastly, we'll close with the October prayer intention. So thank you, friends. Welcome back to the show. Let's start with this new document. Father, can you kick us off? What is it? And maybe give us an overview of everything covered in the first chapter. And you've got about 30 seconds.
Okay, well, basically, this is a new apostolic exhortation. So it's not an encyclical, but I think this would be a level down from that. And this is, obviously an official teaching. This is basically the first major official teaching that we get from Pope Leo XIV. And this is Dilexi Te to all Christians on love for the poor. And so, like you said in the introduction, this is actually a follow-up to Dilexi Nos that was written by Pope Francis. This is a document that we were going through previously on the channel. And this actually was a document that Pope Francis had conceived of. This was one that he was working on prior to his death. And then Pope Leo took it
Really?
up,
Okay.
edited it, made his own changes to it, or he basically made it into his own document. And then issued it as the apostolic exhortation. So it's basically summarizing. It's actually a very traditional document in the sense that it's bringing us back to the church's tradition of solidarity with the poor and uniting ourselves with the poor. This is something that, if you look at the early church fathers, and I've shared quotes on social media time and time again from John Chrysostom, from all these different early church fathers who have talked about the obligation and even the unity that the church has with the poor. And I think this is the tradition that Pope Leo is bringing to the forefront. And he's addressing really a lot of the issues that we're seeing in today's society, and even trying to address some of the misconceptions that we see about poverty, about, how, maybe a lot of people like to say that the, modern economy has helped to bring a lot of people out of poverty. And yet Pope Leo is actually reframing the discussion to bring up different forms of poverty that maybe we haven't talked about before, or maybe that we haven't considered before, because poverty has to be taken into consideration, the entire situation that people are in. Access to the internet is even something that, has to be taken into consideration, when we're talking about poverty. And so poverty is going to look different depending on the time period that we're in. And he's also, he's talked about how unjust it is that there's a few people, a few elites who own a lot of the wealth and a lot of the property around the world, and are holding that while there's so many people who are going without throughout the world. And so he's basically showing how Jesus Christ came as a poor man, and he's one who has identified with the poor. Those who love the least of my brethren, they've loved me. So he's bringing this whole traditional teaching of the church back to the fore, and reminding the church of the fact that we're supposed to be a church for the poor, which is entirely in line with the program of Vatican II, and the popes that have come after Vatican II. So that's what I've gathered from it so far, just from the first two chapters. It's chock full of good teaching.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Well, we're going to encourage me as well as everybody. Let's definitely be reading through this document. And maybe what we can do is, like this, provide a little bit of commentary each week. And for those who can't read it, we can get a sense of where it's going so that when we do approach it, we're a little more prepared, a little more informed. Karen, I think you also started reading it. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yes, well, very similar to Father Matthew as he's read it too, calling the church's attention to Jesus and the poor, that when we encounter the poor, and so, and my prayer is that the church, wherever we are in the world, will pay attention to this document. I think it's really, really critical to our faith and to the mission of the church and our missionary attitude. So the poor does take many different forms, like we know in the Beatitudes. And in Matthew 5, Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit. In Luke, it's blessed are the poor. And then at the end of Matthew chapter 25, Jesus says, you do this to the least of these, my brethren, you do this unto me. So seeing Jesus in the prisoners and the sick and those who suffer. So he does say just briefly, I'll mention in paragraph 9, he says, at the same time, we should perhaps speak more correctly of the many faces of the poor and of poverty, since it's a multifaceted phenomenon. In fact, there are many forms of poverty: the poverty of those who lack material means of subsistence, the poverty of those who are socially marginalized and lack the means to give voice to their dignity and abilities, moral and spiritual poverty, cultural poverty, and the poverty of those who find themselves in a condition of personal or social weakness or fragility, the poverty of those who have no rights, no space, and no freedom. So there's just an incredible need here for the church to pay attention to what he's saying, and I hope we wake up to it.
So the central takeaway that I'm hearing is not a broadening, but an enriching of our definition of poverty, and an understanding that job's not done just because maybe we in the First World West have reached certain benchmarks of good living, but there's still a lot of work and a lot of good that needs to be done. And there's still a lot that we need to do and that we can do. So following then from this, over the last couple of weeks, there's been a situation with an award and Cardinal Cupich, and that drew a couple of comments from the Holy Father. Really, the thing that I wanted to invite you both to help speak to is his upholding of a consistent life ethic. And Father, I've been grateful in the past how you've talked about the seamless garment metaphor, or there's another phrase that you've used that's in popular parlance about how to talk about this whole thing. Can you catch us up very briefly with what's been going on, but most importantly, what has the Holy Father been reaffirming as the position of the Church on how to go about this discussion?
Sure. So I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the situation that's been going on with Cardinal Cupich and with Senator Durbin, Dick Durbin. So of course, he's been a longtime senator, and Cardinal Cupich had wanted to give him an award for the work that he has done throughout the years for on behalf of immigrants. And as soon as this was announced, this was made public. We had a huge outcry from all different kinds of people, from pro-life people and so forth, stating that, basically reminding Cardinal Cupich of his position, Dick Durbin's positions on abortion, how, he's pro-choice and so forth. And, so there was a huge firestorm, a huge media firestorm that was kicked up, as a result of this. Eventually, Dick Durbin actually did turn down, or he declined the award, so he's not receiving it. But this, while the firestorm was going on, Pope Leo was being interviewed by this reporter, and the question of this situation came up. And actually, I can actually quote you what Pope Leo said in response to the reporter. So the reporter basically asked about this situation and, asked for his thoughts about this. And here's what Pope Leo said. He said, he says, someone who says I'm against abortion, but says I'm in favor of the death penalty is not really pro-life. Someone who says that I'm against abortion, but I'm in agreement with the inhumane treatment of immigrants here in the United States, I don't know if that's pro-life. He goes on to say, they're very complex issues. I don't know if anyone has the truth on all of them. And this is actually very consistent with what Pope Leo has said on occasions, even before he became Pope. There was a talk that actually went around shortly after his election as the Supreme Pontiff. And this was a talk I think he gave a couple years ago. I think it was at a university. And he talked about what falls under different names. So we have the consistent life ethic. We have the, as you said, the seamless garments. This is something that was really advocated by Cardinal Bernardin. Pope Leo had mentioned this in this talk, and how there needs to be this consistency, especially if we're going to be calling ourselves pro-life, to recognize the fact that human life, when we talk about, and this is something that Pope John Paul II has also mentioned in his encyclical Humanae Vitae, how human life is sacred. In human life, there's an inherent dignity of all human life, from conception to natural death. We've heard this line time and time again, throughout the years, and this is something that comes from Pope John Paul II, It was echoed by Cardinal Bernardin. It's also re-echoed by Pope Leo XIV. But what often happens is that the pro-life movement, as good as these people might be, and as good as their intentions might be, they really only become fixed on the issue of abortion. And what often happens is when we're using this as an issue, a lot of other things get overlooked, and there's a lot of people who end up suffering as a result of it. And we're looking at the immigration issue in this country, as an example of that. How now we're having these people who consider themselves or call themselves pro-life, or these senators, these representatives who call themselves pro-life, but who are advocating the most horrible policies, that are being enacted, against immigrants in this country. And you're seeing how there's this disconnect, between people who say that they're pro-life and then the way that we actually treat other human beings who are not just, babies in the womb. So it's actually helping to illustrate the point that there does need to be a consistency in the pro-life movement, that if we're saying that we're in favor of life, we're in favor of all human life, not just the life in the womb, but also life outside the womb, elderly people, immigrants, whatever their nationality might be, whatever the color of skin is. Every single person has that equal human dignity. And so I think that's the point that Pope Leo was trying to make. He wasn't trying to downplay abortion. He wasn't trying to downplay the significance of that issue or anything like that. But he's trying to help us to think outside of the box.
Right.
That a lot
Elevate
of
the
us
importance of these other issues that are of equal importance, but
Sure.
not being treated the same way. Karen,
Absolutely.
anything you'd like to add?
Well, I just saw this as Cardinal Cupich trying to bring balance in the United States to the issue of life. So trying to bring forward an issue that is often overlooked within the United States. And I think that's a healthy way to look at it, a consistent life ethic, and that there's so many issues out there of the marginalized different communities that get so overlooked all the time. And the issues are complex with women and what happens, and they need healing and help too. So, and of course, I'm not saying to the negation of the other. So to the unborn, but I'm just saying it is and we get so narrowly focused, we forget about, it seems to be a way of kind of scapegoating a particular group. And sometimes I think we can get so narrowly focused on something. So it's also a way that we don't have to look at ourselves if we're constantly trying to take up a cause of something else, which is, I'm not saying we shouldn't. Of course we should, the church, but we all have issues in our lives that need to be dealt with. It's complicated.
It is. Yeah. And I think that's the point, that the Pope is trying to make, with this is, we try to oversimplify, these issues like this, but even when we're talking about moral theology is much more complicated than people make it out to be. It's not just about mortal sin, no mortal sin. It's like, no, there's also knowledge, there's full consent of the will, there's circumstances, there's all kinds of things that factor into the picture. And you can't just look at a person who has an abortion and say that person is in mortal sin. We don't know that person's level of knowledge. We don't know the circumstances of their life. We don't know the pressure that they're going through, all the kinds of stuff that enter into a person's moral situation. And so, we have to try to be mindful of these things as well, and to start listening to people, and to even listen to people who, are in these vulnerable situations, and say, what are other ways that we can help these people other than just saying, you're an evil person and you have to stop, killing babies or whatever.
So, and this is where Cardinal Cupich, along the lines with Pope Francis and Pope Leo and what's happening in Rome, instead of entering into an argument and the divisiveness and the fighting and insulting and the backlash, he offered a solution. He said, why don't we have a synodal gathering? Why don't we get together and respect and listen to one another? And I thought that was brilliant. Let's get into the solution. And so again, Absolutely. I just have to say, in recovery, it's all about getting in the solution. You'll hear it at meeting, like, we need to get in the solution. What's the solution? Well, okay, prayer, dialogue, listening to Rome, and being obedient, to the Holy Father and to Rome and Vatican II and all this.
Father, what's your take, and Karen, your take on the Pope saying that he's not sure that anybody has the absolute truth on all of these issues? What's your read on what he means by that?
Well,
and if you want to correct the quote, please do.
My read on that is a little bit what Father Matthew just touched on, is how complicated moral theology is, right? And the depths that you can dive into that, and all different factors that constitute guilt. Okay, I'm not an expert, but I'm just saying this is what I took from all of that. that the issues are very, very complicated, and we got to be quick to listen and not quick to judge. That's, God is ultimate authority and judge on all things.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think of the issue of immigration, and that's something where people who are pro-life might be in favor of the policies that are being enacted right now, in the United States, and they say that people who are here illegally should just be deported, and they're criminals and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, the situation is much more complicated than that, and if we're going to look at that as a pro-life issue, then we need to have a better understanding of, first, how does the immigration system work in the United States? And a better question might actually be, how does it not work? Which is much more in tune with the reality of the situation, because the immigration system in America is broken. There's a lot of serious issues with the immigration issue. And the fact of the matter is that, neither side of the aisle really wants to do anything about it, because both of them will use it as a wedge issue in the elections. So it'll help them to win elections, for their side. So, it's really something where, we have to come to understand, how does immigration work? And then also to understand that just because a person is undocumented doesn't mean that they're illegal. It's not a crime to be undocumented. And as a lot of people have that misconception that, if you come here and you don't have documentation, that you're a criminal. That's not how the law works. It's a civil violation, but it's not a crime to be here without documentation. And that's often how people have to go through the process in order to become legal. They actually have to be here for a while. They have to go through the legal process. They have to go through the court system and so forth. But a lot of people don't know this process, and they think that, undocumented means that you're illegal. And there's this oversimplification of the issue that often takes place in people's minds. And it could be for different reasons. It could be just people really just don't understand the whole issue, misinformed by, the media, especially the, right-wing media that often, will just focus on, we just have a whole bunch of, we have an invasion of people who are coming in from these countries, and, classifying them as if they're an army, an invading army coming in to attack the United States. And it's like, well, if you frame it in language like that, then yes, people are going to get upset about it. And, they want to repel them, from this country. It's like, yeah, I can understand why they would get so upset about it. But the fact of the matter is, that's not how it actually is working, in reality. And that's why it's so important, like Karen said, to have this synodality, being able to dialogue with one another and to come to a better understanding of especially what these people are going through, trying to become legal in this country.
I'm struggling to remember where I had this conversation. I think it was somewhere on this channel, but it was with the difficulty of oversimplifying that happens on different sides of the aisles across the spectrum, because things get complex and it can be impossibly hard to deal with stuff. And so we simplify them so that we can get through the day and make a decision. But the problem is that almost always ignores the actual problem of the person who's having to go through these things. So, like you said, listening, there's the accompanying part. I think that it's an unavoidable thing that we do as humans. We have to try to come up with a simple solution, a simple idea to start clearing the air, clearing the water. But then where the rubber actually hits the road is where we then start practicing the more careful discernment and the accompaniment. And it sounds like this is where the Holy Father is trying to keep, especially as Christians, as Catholics, to keep us focused on that finer point of, yes, the world's a mess, but there are specific things that we still can't do as we try to go about solving problems. Karen, you look like you have something to add.
Yeah. So what troubles me personally is just the dialogue about these different issues, whether it's immigration or abortion, that we talk about people almost as commodities, as things like there's nobody, like there aren't people with lives, with feelings, with difficulty, with challenges. Like there's a disconnect for me in all of that, in the way it's talked about in the church. And it seems to kind of be the elephant in the room a little bit, just we take the humanity out of it, or the compassion. I don't really get that, or how it just feels so cold the way it's all discussed sometimes, especially, of course, in the media. And I think it's where we've been desensitized by it. But it's Cardinal Pham, right? Is it that his name, the Bishop of San Diego, that Cardinal Pope Leo was the first Bishop Pham, that Pope Leo assigned to San Diego. He is a Vietnamese immigrant. And so he has been praying at the immigration office as a way to show solidarity. I don't know of anyone else doing that. It made me want to go check out our local immigration office here and maybe go and do that when folks are praying at the abortion clinics, which is needed. But I'm just thinking of like balance, how can Catholics show that consistent life ethic and, and take action in that way, but really start to care about one another.
Sure. Do you mind if I tell a personal anecdote?
Please do.
Is it okay? Okay. So a few years ago when I was at the pro-life march, I was at the, March for Life. I was working with EWTN at the time. So I, do whatever it is they need me to do to help with, behind the scenes work and production and so forth. So at the end of the march, I was heading back to my hotel, and I think I was with Brother Leo, and we got stopped by this woman, and I could tell that she wasn't too happy. And so she, approached us, and like she started talking to me, and Pope Leo ended up continuing towards the hotel, and he figured, he'd just meet me there. So she started talking to me, and she's basically challenging me, and she's saying, if you really consider yourself to be pro-life, why wouldn't you be against something like nuclear proliferation? And I said to her immediately, I'm against nuclear proliferation. And in fact, our Holy Father, Pope Francis, is very much against nuclear proliferation. And as soon as I said that to her, you could tell that the defensiveness just immediately dissipated from her. And she was just like, she was almost stunned by my answer. She's like, really? Like almost like she wasn't expecting, a pro-lifer to say that, just to be very direct about this. And I was like, yeah. And she was like, okay, well, would you want to, protest against nuclear proliferation, or would you join, like a protest against nuclear proliferation? I said, absolutely. I absolutely would. I would, sign me up, show me where it is and I'll be there, to protest again. And she was like, wow, that's great. And so we ended up, talking a little bit more, and we exchanged information with one another. I'm pretty sure she probably would have been, pro-choice and stuff I didn't really ask her about her position on abortion or anything like that. But the fact of the matter is like, it goes to show that if we show this more consistent stance, towards life, it opens up even more doorways for us to be able to interact with people who have different concerns like this, about nuclear weapons and other, attacks against life, because that is also another attack against life. That's a pro-life issue, that we want to be against nuclear weapons, and we want to, have disarmament, of different countries. That's something that Pope Francis has mentioned as well. But this can be a great way to work with other people who maybe don't see eye to eye with us, on the abortion issue, but they certainly would see eye to eye with us on an issue like that. And it helps to break down the barriers that we have. And maybe then they might be more receptive to what we have to say, about the abortion issue if we start to approach it that way. So I think it opens up, channels of dialogue that way.
Frankly, I find that the more we try to be practicing Catholics, the less partisan, frankly, we become, the less party focused and the more personal. And we can't
Exactly.
be put in boxes because we're all about the human box and Christ. And these things can't be, neatly partitioned. And so it kind of, I think that's, so speaking of Christ meeting us in our darkest places, which has been something that's come up a lot in this conversation, I think it's a good tie-in. Karen, you mentioned that Pope Leo had I think it was a Wednesday audience where he spoke to the resurrection of Christ. Can you capture some of that for us?
Yes, there's just a paragraph in there that reminds me very much similar to Pope Francis, or what Francis was always kind of teaching, and Pope Leo is doing this too. And I think it's really important. And it's from October 8th. So just this past Wednesday. Jesus Christ is our hope, rekindling were not our hearts burning within us, and recognizing Christ in our most difficult moments. Brothers and sisters, Christ's resurrection teaches us that no history is so marked by disappointment or sin that it cannot be visited by hope. No fall is definitive. No night is eternal. No wound is destined to remain open forever. However distant, lost, or unworthy we may feel, there is no distance that can extinguish the unfailing power of God's love. And here we go. Sometimes we think that the Lord comes to visit us only in the moments of contemplation or spiritual fervor, when we feel worthy, when our lives appear orderly and bright. Instead, the risen one is close to us precisely in the darkest places, in our failures, in our frayed relationships, in the daily struggles that weigh on our shoulders, in the doubts that discourage us. Nothing that we are, no fragment of our existence is foreign to him. Today, the risen Lord walks alongside each of us as we travel our paths. The risen Lord. Yeah.
That is beautiful.
It's
Father,
awesome.
any commentary?
Yeah, and in fact, I wanted to just mention a little bit earlier in the audience, he says, there's an obstacle that often prevents us from recognizing Christ's presence in our daily lives, the assumption that joy must be free from suffering. The disciples of Emmaus walk sadly because they hoped for a different ending for a Messiah who does not know the cross. Although they have heard that the tomb is empty, they cannot smile. But Jesus walks alongside them and patiently helps them understand that pain is not the denial of the promise, but the way through which God has manifested the measure of his love. It's just the whole audience is just really amazing. And I think that's a great point that he brings up, because I think people often have the misconception that if we're with the Lord, we're always going to be full of joy. There's not going to be any suffering in our life, and then when we think that, and then all of a sudden when suffering comes and we're going through all of the struggles, all the difficulties, we keep falling into sin, all the different things that happen to us in this life, people are tempted to think that, well, maybe the Lord's not really with me, or maybe all this is not true, or the Lord really hates me, or whatever it might be, all the different thoughts that, go through people's minds. But I think this is a very important point that the Holy Father is making, is that even in the midst of our pain and in our suffering, we still have that joy. That joy is something that nothing else can take away. And so we even continue to persevere in that joy, even through the pains and the sorrows and the struggles and all those different things. But just knowing that the Lord is still present with us and he's guiding us along the way, just as he did, the disciples of Emmaus. But I think that's just a wonderful point, that he brought up there.
That's wonderful. Thank you both. Karen, could you share with us the prayer intention for October?
Yes. Pope Leo released his prayer intention for the month of October, inviting the faithful to pray for collaboration between different religious traditions. So the Pope invited the Church to pray for this intention in this month's The Pope video. He has a video out there, but the prayer goes like this. Lord Jesus, the Pope's prayer begins. You who in diversity are one and look lovingly at every person, help us to recognize ourselves as brothers and sisters called to live, pray, work, and dream together. He acknowledges that despite being a world full of beauty, it is also wounded by deep divisions, where sometimes he lamented religions, instead of uniting us, become a cause of confrontation. Hence, he implores, give us your spirit to purify our hearts so that we may recognize what unites us, and from there learn again how to listen and collaborate without destroying. The Holy Father went on to pray that the concrete examples of peace, justice, and fraternity in religions inspire us to believe that it is possible to live and work together beyond our differences. It is possible. May religions not be used as weapons or walls, but rather lived as bridges and prophecy, making the dream of the common good credible, accompanying life, sustaining hope, and being the yeast of unity in a fragmented world. Amen. The Pope concludes.
Amen. Well, thank you both so much for coming back on. Friends, watching this, catching the replay, please let us know what you think. Drop a comment below. It's always wonderful to hear from you. And if you haven't yet, come and check us out in smartcatholics.com. It's the community bringing you these series of conversations. During the pontificate of Pope Francis, we decided as a group of random friends and strangers from around the world that we want to understand and study the Holy Fathers, study the popes on their own terms. And half the time when you do that, you end up finding out what wonderful things that they actually have to share and teach us. So come and check us out at smartcatholics.com, and I'm going to invite you to please consider praying for us. Put us right in between your daily prayer for the Holy Father and your daily prayer for the monthly intention. Just put Smart Catholics right in there. Pray for us. We'll pray for you. Hi, friends. A special invite. If you haven't ever heard of it, I host a fiction convention every year called LegendHaven. It is the friendliest fiction convention in the galaxy. We are on a mission to help readers and authors come together and enjoy a full weekend. It's all day Saturday and Sunday. It's the October 18th and 19th. Tickets are only $10. You can see a link in the description to come check it out. I am partnering with a priest out of the Netherlands, Father Roderick von Hogen. Father Matthew Bartow is also going to be live streaming during this, and we're hosting a special panel on faith and fantasy. So if you like fiction and stories and novels and sci-fi and fantasy and that sort of creative stuff, or if you have children who are trying to write novels and writing stories, or friends or a classroom, come and check out legendhaven.com. It's a project I am proud to be partnering with. Okay, I made it. But Smart Catholics is also a part of it, and you're all invited. So please check it out at legendhaven.com.